The historic Arkansas Museum is located in downtown Little Rock. The museum encompasses 5 antebellum-era houses situated on their original foundations. The houses are used to interpret the lives of 19th century urban slaves and slave owners.
This is the Brownley house, built by Robert Brownley for his brother James and James's wife Isabel. They did have 2 slaves. One of them was named Tabby. We do not know the name of the other slave, but Tabby is the slave that would have spent her time caring for the house and the outbuildings. Where we are now is the bedroom. This is typical of a middle-class bedroom. This is dated approximately 1848 to 1852. We know Mrs. Brownley did needlework, so we have placed items in here that she might have used working with yarn. Mrs. Brownley is Isabel Brownley, who married James when she was about 14. She came here when she was about 16 years old, so she was a young bride. She was away from home, far, far away from home, and was homesick and very unhappy, and she was a bit sickly as well. So Robert Brownley speaks of Tabby, her slave, very briefly in his memoir. He says that Isabel took her passions out on Tabby. We don't know exactly what that means, except that she was treated badly and that Robert Brownley noticed it. We're walking through what would be the breezeway, and actually in the summer, this is the coolest part of the house. We open both doors, and most of the family's time would be spent out here. They might even take the dining room table and bring it out here to have their meals. This is the parlor. This is where, if Mrs. Brownley had been inclined to do any entertaining, this is where she would have done it. Isabel Brownley was taken from her home when she was so young. She came to Arkansas when she was still a teenager and had not been married to James Brownley for very long. They arrived in 1848 and they left in 1852. The house was sold in 1852. Isabel felt isolated here, and she returned to Scotland while her husband James went to California. So a few yards away from the Brownley house is one of the outbuildings. This is the Brownley kitchen. This is where Tabby would have had her own bedroom and would have done most of her work for the Brownley family. She was responsible for the laundry. She would have been responsible for cooking all of the meals. She would have tended the garden, and she likely was responsible for any work done in the smokehouse as well. She was the only slave of the Brownley family, and so Tabby would have been responsible for maintaining the household all together. This is the work area of the kitchen. Everything in here is actually reproduction, although it is authentic 1840s, 1850s furniture. A typical day for Tabby might have been she gets up in the morning and she begins cooking a morning meal. Her cooking of the big meal of the day typically would be done by noon or 1 o'clock, and then in the afternoon she would work on perhaps repairing clothing, making clothing, cleaning, things like that. Generally the cooking was done before the hot part of the day. Ladies of the house typically worked alongside their slaves depending on what the work was that was to be done. Polishing of silver, often the cooking might be done right alongside the slaves. Since Tabby was the only slave, Isabel probably worked alongside her doing most of the tasks that needed to be done. The Ashley family was unusual. The Ashley family lived on another block near here, and they made an effort to keep their slave families together, but that certainly was not typical here. The talk in the town was that if you were a slave, that you would want to be a slave of the Ashley family. The Ashley family gave their slaves a little more autonomy than some of the other slaves in town would have had. There were many more of them, so their duties were more specific. They were to come and go, not as they pleased, but as needed to take care of the things done in the household, which was true for Tabby also. That would have also been true for Tabby. So as you're cooking, your tasks might include going to the market to buy more food, which would have been on an account by the family at the store. Slaves in general in towns had more autonomy than slaves on plantations did. So in that respect, the Ashley family was not that unusual, but the Ashley family was known to be kinder to their slaves than Isabel likely was to Tabby. This is Tabby's bedroom area. This would have been pretty much her own space. Right here, what we have set up is somewhere for her to hang her laundry in case of rain. It looks like it might rain today, so any laundry she hangs to dry, she'll hang on these bamboo poles here. This is her bed, and it is like a Murphy bed, so it'll fold up against the wall in case Tabby needed more room in here. She has her own fireplace that she probably would have kept lit most of the time. And we do have some things that she might have had, little boxes for anything that she wanted to keep things in. There were a lot of slaves in the area who aspired to learn to read, especially after learning that the Ashley slaves, almost all of them were literate. So Tabby probably was one of the slaves who would have attended one of William Wallace Andrews' prayer meetings. William Wallace Andrews was one of the Ashley slaves, and he was a minister, and he would conduct prayer meetings at his home. And during the course of those prayer meetings, he taught the attendees to actually read the words in the Bible. I think Tabby probably was one of those slaves who would have gone to one of those prayer meetings. I was very surprised by the autonomy the slaves were given, how they were not just permitted, but required to come and go without constant permission from the slave master. There were things that they were expected to take care of during the day, and in the course of that, if you were required to go to the market, you were required to go to the river to meet a shipment, you were expected to do that, and you didn't have to have a pass to do so, as the slaves on plantations did. Slaves on plantations had to have a pass to move from one plantation to the other, even if they were going to go visit their families. Slaves in urban areas were expected to come and go, and they were not required to have a pass to do so. I think people have a conception of slavery, but not so much of the individual people. What we try to convey here is that the slave experience was as varied for the enslaved people as life would have been for free people. No two slaves had exactly the same experience.